Okay, so I'm here with Chris Henshaw, who is the former head admin at the National University Esports League, and now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the League Operations Manager at National Student Esports. So
that is what it says on my business card. So
perfect. So in that role, I'm guessing you have a lot of interaction with the UK esports scene. So what kind of state do you think it's in today? The Counter-Strike scene specifically.
I think the Counter-Strike scene's struggling a little bit at the amateur level, which is not the worst thing because like amateur Counter-Strike has been like leagues ahead of other games for quite a while now. Just up until like the last few LANs have dropped in attendance, but as someone who's been running League of Legends tournaments at these events a lot of the time, there's definitely a lot more CSGO players than there have been any others at any LANs I've been to. And we're talking we're talking 100 CSGO teams and like 20 League of Legends teams, and League of Legends is the second biggest game. So we've had Overwatch and Rocket League peak a bit higher than that. So before someone like sends me an angry email telling me I'm wrong, but yeah.
Okay. So what kind of role do you think these organisations, the Newell and the NSE, what kind of role do you think they play in the scene? Do you think they're important with helping the scene grow, or do you think they don't play such a big role?
You do see a bit of crossover. I think one of the criticisms you can have of the university scene, which is fair, that it is very isolated from everything else. It's becoming less so as... we've been doing CSGO for 2 or 3 years, and we're starting to see people graduate from university who are going, well, I like esports, I'm going to keep doing it, and they're moving on to LANs and moving on to other things like playing ESEA and all that kind of thing. But it's often hard to make that transition because, often the level is just a higher level. Like, university teams are great. It's a lot of fun being on a university team, but at the end of the day, you're stuck with who you're with. So you get these friends and you're all about as good, whereas the top teams are just 5 players who've got together because they're all good at CSGO. Like, that's why they're friends. It's no geographical convenience thing. So those teams tend to be a bit better and practice for longer with other teams who are built like that. But you're seeing more and more societies go to things like, I'd always recommend it. Like, you can go to a LAN and suck and it's fun. Like that's my experience of it, at least.
Yeah.
So, no, I've never been to a LAN of a game I'm good at. I've only ever been to LANs where I'm bad at the game, which might be a mistake, but
sure.
It's fun.
So do you think this growth can be attributed to esports growing as a whole and becoming more mainstream, or do we think that these organisations actually have like a role to play in this? Are they actually helping people like discover esports as something that they want to do?
It's a bit of both. Like, there's a huge reason like the success of esports has gone up in the last few years. There's a bunch of like little reasons, like internet getting better, like more games actually being able to support multiplayer play online. The university organisations are a huge part of why it grows. I'd like to think it's all because I've done a great job, but realistically, you've kind of got this perfect situation. Like, university clubs are always bigger. One of the places where people do clubs, it's a great point in your life to get involved. And almost like one of the problems you often have, as I alluded to earlier, of what makes teams so good at LAN compared to like these university teams is you get together because you're good, and it's hard to stay together unless you're winning or unless you're competing towards something. Whereas these university teams, because you actually have this restrictive entry, you get these friendships born, and that you've got this club. Like, you don't have this place where if I get good enough, I'm going to go to the next team up. You're still going to stay in that community even if you move from the second to first team. So people have these long times in a community, which really makes, as a lot of what amateur sports has, it brings it to esports, where it's really hard to do that with esports, just because of how teams are incentivized to split up, form new teams, and you get to know everyone in the scene, but the same 5 players, it's very rare for them to stay on the same team for a very long time.
Yeah. I've heard people like Richard Lewis talk about something similar in the past, where it's kind of a vicious circle of organisers don't have the funding to put into contracts for good players, so they can't keep the good players, and because there's no contracts, the good players they can't put as much time into to become these great players. Do you think that's like part of the issue with why we don't have any like UK teams competing on an international level, or is it more of a culture thing?
I think it's tough. I mean, the CS:GO, we're not doing that well internationally at the moment. I think that is actually fair to say. But a lot of the times we have this, like, my personal view is you look at the UK and you look at our esports players, you look at like other games like Overwatch League or like EULCS, there's a couple of British players, and the EULCS, there's a couple of British players in Overwatch League. There's not many of us on a global scale. We've got a bit of a grandized opinion of how good the UK should be. We're not like some of these nations that are doing incredibly well, like Korea is, or like maybe even Denmark per person has a ridiculous number of professional players. But we're not doing terribly. Could we do more? Possibly. It's hard to say. Like, it's kind of one of these problems of, like, one of the reasons our players probably aren't as good is because we spend too much time having fun. Like university esports is great, but it doesn't breed the best players. Like, you get good players in it, but most people there are as much as aiming to improve. There's like a lot of play. Like, as I'm saying, it's not the same as like a training camp where players go to get good and that's the only thing they want to do. And inherently LANs are a bit like that as well. It's part of why I like them. They're a lot of fun. People do go there to win, but most people go there to spend a weekend with their friends playing the thing they love to do. But it's, for a lot of players there, becoming a professional is almost never the goal. It's kind of an end unto itself. Whereas I don't know if that's true everywhere else.
So is it fair to say that you would say it's a very casual atmosphere, and perhaps people aren't being pushed towards going into esports as a career? Maybe they don't think it's an option?
It's hard to be sure. Like, I feel I may have oversold that how casual it is, because I don't want to undermine the teams who are working very hard to get good. It's like you can only beat the people who are in front of you. So for all the players who are very good, almost, the thing is, esports is very weird because you develop much more as an individual than you do as a team when you're looking to go professionally. Like some teams, because of how easy it is to move between teams, things like ESL Prem and stuff, like a lot of the online leagues that are getting more popular, are actually more focused on winning and being a good team, being consistent. And yeah, the problem is, like, we don't have professional leagues as such. We have these big amateur brackets a lot of the time, and you see the best teams, even when they're playing well, they play 15 games in a weekend. 8 of those are games they're going to win without blinking. If they tried, they could 15-0 them. Getting through groups if you're going to win the whole thing, getting through groups is trivial. So you end up only playing 4 or 5 games that challenge you, and maybe only 1 or 2 that only the top 8 is the only time you might lose a map for the really top team. So it is quite hard to practice. I mean, they're great events, and winning them is impressive, and people are starting to lose a bit of pride in winning them, and it's still impressive to win these events, but they aren't necessarily the best way to train a professional scene. But I do think, like, we shouldn't take for granted that we have this great scene where people can go, we can play, like, lots of teams show up, and it's a great experience, and you are competing in a competitive field. Like, winning these events is not easy, but whether you can get from there to playing professionally is again another huge gap. Like, there's one thing being a top team in the UK, it's another thing being like that's 60 million people trying to be a top team out of like 7 billion people. I mean, that's an exaggeration, because I know, like, we haven't quite got to a point where we have everyone playing video games like we do in the West everywhere, but it's just a whole other level, and it's hard to make that transition even for the best players.
Definitely. So is there a lack of competition that means that the people in the UK, they can't hone their skills to become as good as people in other countries? Because I've noticed a trend. I mean, I think anyone that's followed Counter-Strike, the professional scene, will have noticed a trend of teams becoming more international. Like, several years ago, we'd have NIP, completely Swedish. We'd have Navi, completely Ukrainian, I think, with a couple of Eastern Europeans. But now we have, with FaZe, we have completely international rosters. Mouse Sports, previously German, now completely international. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do we think that the increasing availability of positions on other rosters gives people an opportunity to go to better teams where they can improve?
Absolutely. Like, I do think it is hard, particularly for something like Counter-Strike compared to other games where, like, communication, it's not just communication, but quick communication is key. Like, if you look at a MOBA, you still need to be able to understand each other, but at the end of the day, if you make your plan and 5 seconds later you execute it, because unless you're in a team fight, you're just calling player names, and that's kind of universal language, that's fine. In CSGO, you've got so many places to call constantly and make decisions, and like, your eyes and ears are the rest of the team, so it's why it's taken international teams a bit longer. But eventually, individual skill and working out ways to communicate is starting to come into CS. So that is great for UK players because we already speak English, and that's often the language people will use. It's why English commentators often do very well internationally. We're not that much better, but we speak it as a first language, so we do very well casting internationally.
So do you think that's part of the reason that we've managed to kind of maintain a position at the forefront of esports despite not having necessarily the best talent in terms of players? Because, yeah, we do have that advantage, even if it's only a small one, having English as our first language. And obviously we've got the Faceit Major going on at the moment. Do you think that's been solidified by the fact that we have all this talent that's English or from the UK?
It's a tough one. Like, we have a lot of casting talent and hosting talent. I mean, one of the things that things like iSeries do is there are actually a load of opportunities in the UK to get into casting. That's one of the big things the university scene does. It's one of the big things the amateur scene does in general. Like, people don't realise almost that, like, when you're looking at these low-level professional gigs, they're always going to hire the person who has experience, even if it's you've just done, like, one level up. Like, if you want to start casting, cast some of your own games or your friends' games in, like, a university competition. When the university people are looking for people to cast them, they'll ask you to do it over some other person who's got no experience. And then when it comes on to Insomnia, they then ask the university, and it kind of goes up the chain. So, like, it's no guarantee of success, but, like, there's a very good career path through doing the work, having experience. And if you put the work in, a lot of casters can get there. There's always demand for English-speaking talent. For a lot of people, when you see these international casters, they've often had to learn to cast in another language and then learn to speak English and cast. And that's no easy thing, like getting into idioms in another language and talking in general flow, and that's hard to do. We also do have a lot of stuff like business-wise here, like, and also in the US, like a lot of esports companies, like obviously Fnatic are based in London, Faceit are based in London. There are some big companies that, and that helps the talent. And, like, the UK is a great place to host events. It at least should be. There's a couple of reasons slowing it down, but I'm optimistic, and it's really cool to have some big events here, especially in London, where I am, even if I can't go. But it's nice to know they're happening.
It's great to have this the first Counter-Strike major being held in the UK, and what's even better is that this is the first major that we have a couple of we actually have a couple of players from the UK that are going to be competing. So we've got Def from Complexity and Smooya from Big. So I guess they're part of this increased international availability of players. So we actually saw an interview with Smooya yesterday after Big got through to the next stage, and he talked about how he felt the UK scene was being hindered by people being arrogant, and people just needed to be humble. Is that something you've come across, or not really?
It's something you definitely come across in all the esports scenes. CSGO has a bit of it more so, because you do definitely still have the players around from 1.6 who've been coming to LANs for like since like I-25 or something, and tell all the old war stories. And it's great fun going out to the pub with them and hearing these back in my day tales. But it's not everyone. There are some people who are arrogant. There's some idea. As I say, like, a big problem is that are saying these people come to these lands and they just stomp their first 10 group games, like however many group games they have. So like you can see where they come on being arrogant, and we kind of lack a progression for these teams to play against the better teams. But it's more so not these teams, but the players. Like I feel very unlikely that we're going to get 5 UK players all of a sudden who are good enough to be playing at a major. But these international teams mean that if these teams play against each other, one of the players might get picked up, and then 2, and then eventually we might have more players enough to have a UK team on some level. But all these things take time. I think it's getting better. There's more teams who are aware that the reason we've been like they've done well for the last 5 years, but they haven't done better in the last 5 years, and they're starting to kind of realise that it's like, okay, it's not like we haven't achieved anything, but we've stopped improving, at least relative to other people. So we need to step it up a little bit.
Yeah,
there are definitely some people who are just like, I'm happy to come to LAN, get my free ticket. It's a nice weekend away. I earn my money back for my ticket, my train fare, and that's all they care about. And it's that's fair enough. These events, like, it's what you want to do with a bank holiday weekend. I'd love to go and make money playing CS:GO for a weekend, but you need to be a little bit more serious to win these events or do better in bigger events in the future.
Yeah, maybe now that players are able to go to other teams with more competition, maybe the UK scene will start to pick up speed as these UK talents. We have more people who are able to compete at that level, and they can compete amongst themselves. Smooya actually said, don't be super arrogant, because even if you think you're good in your scene, you're not good at all. Be humble. Which I think you summarise perfectly with what you're saying about people just being able to be the best in their little competitions, but it doesn't translate necessarily to a wider scale. But obviously we do have this major in the UK at the moment. Do you think this will help the UKCS scene?
Like, undoubtedly will. Like, we might not actually see the effect for a couple of years, but there's so much evidence around this. Like you look at the Olympics when they're in this country, suddenly we have, and Chris Hoy, and suddenly like British cycling has doubled in the last 10 years. So it's also like, it's great that we have these players on it when it's the first British major. It's also like, just believing that you can get there is a huge part in breaking that cycle of, well, I'm the best, I can win all these events, but you need to be able to see what your next goal is. And by having other people go before you, you can go, oh, maybe I can look for an international team if you weren't thinking of that. Maybe I can go to a major even if you haven't even thought of joining a team. But it's hard to say, but these things, like, if it's pushed well, depends on how the community does it. The UK CSGO community has historically also been really good on stuff like this, like a big shout out to UK CSGO. What is it? I can't remember what the website's actually called. Is it called UK CSGO?
I think so.
Let's go. But yeah, and there's people there always pushing, always helping out. I know Duck's really good as well, writing articles. There's a lot of focus, a lot of community. Like, the community does want to succeed. It just kind of needs to work out how to. And it might not be that it is a UK team, it is these international players at first. And that might be the focus, like, going forwards.
Dan Harper recently did a great article about Def and Smooya going into the Faceit Major. That was a good one. So yeah, we do have this infrastructure, but I definitely do agree. I think that with especially these UK players playing, hopefully they'll help inspire these people to play on a more formal level as opposed to just playing it for fun. Because we do have this very solid foundation of Counter-Strike at a casual level, but maybe we just need something that allows them to pursue something more serious at a professional level. Yeah,
there's nothing like international experience and playing. Like, every time you play it, you go up a level. It's just a whole new thing. It's just every now and then you think you're the best, and then you just find the next group up. You just get promoted to the next rank and discover you're the worst again. And gaming has taught us all that. We just need to work out how to do it with our teams, so our teams actually progress and our players actually progress to play better people. There's no reason why we shouldn't be as good as everyone else.
So you seem quite optimistic for the future of UK Counter-Strike. So do you think that this surge in young talent, if it does come to be, will actually help fix the situation, or is it a deeper problem? Is it a attitude problem?
I mean, there's a couple of different things going on. Like, there's you can't oversimplify the scene because there's two parts of it, and there's the having a strong, healthy amateur competition where people that's something I'm really passionate about, is having something where people can go and play if they want to. The UK's done a really good job of that historically. We've had people when I've been at Insomnia, we've had teams come over from other countries going, remember when we used to just go to LANs, and they kind of gone out of business in some of these areas, or as much as it's great having professional players and having 2 and 3 pros, or some of the bigger places have 5 or 10 from one country, it's still only really that in most places. And you want to have a balance. I don't want to be pessimistic because we do actually have quite a good scene. It's dipped a little bit in the last 2 years, and we shouldn't get complacent about that in terms of attendance. My personal opinion, that's a large part due to not having John Kelly saving the day every day, now that he's busy being employed and can't just be UKCS hero. But I'm very optimistic about the future. Just generally across esports, we're in a bigger place than we've ever been. We're going to have a lot of growing pains for everything as games move. Valve are very hands off. So we've got this major model, but there's no reason why that couldn't change in 2 or 3 years. We've just got to be optimistic and work with what there is. Esports is completely different to what it was 5 years ago. And, in 5 years, we could be in a completely other place. It's a step at a time. Thinking more than 6 months in advance in esports is a dangerous game. And even then, 6 months is kind of a lot.
You say...
I'm optimistic.
Sorry. You say that Valve are very hands-off. Would you like to see more the government be more hands-on in encouraging businesses to get into esports like we have in Denmark?
Yeah, that'd be a no-brainer. One of the big things, one of the big reasons why UKCS is set in Berlin, not London. They would love to be in London if they could afford to be in London. If all the players could definitely get visas of all these kind of things. If all these things 5 years ago were true here, people will go to where it's easiest to be. These companies pick where it's easiest for them to set up. A lot of it is because ESL is based in Germany. That has a huge factor. We can't ignore that. But these places, these big publishers, that's becoming less of an issue. There are more people who could run these events, and they're building entire stadiums for these things, so it doesn't matter. They don't need to be set up where they already are. We're going to say we're going to set up a pro league. What city should we put it in? And put a bid. And we could bid for that. I don't know what the process of this is, because it's a lot of money and it's a kind of decision. I've got no idea who makes these kind of decisions. And there's, I don't know. I love esports. Again, I'm not convinced it's the big political issue of the time, though. It's granting esports players visas. I'm hoping there's someone in the bureaucracy somewhere who checks the paperwork, but it's not something I'm going to campaign over. But government can make a huge effect on incentivizing any business, and it's fundamentally esports is a business. You don't want to get to a crazy state like you have in America, where you see these franchises basically hold cities to ransom, threatening to leave unless they give them millions of dollars of tax breaks. But you can give a little bit of support and it will help. I know companies want to do UK professional domestic leagues a lot of the time because there's interest in viewers. There's a lot of viewers here. There's interest in, again, back to the English language means it has an international appeal. We have a lot of advantages for us already. It wouldn't take much more advantages to make the UK one of the best places to host esports in Europe.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much for putting aside some time to talk to me. Is there anything that you want to shout out? Anything you want to say?
No, obviously, check out our Twitter and all that, at nsc.gg. Oh, my personal one, at nsc Hench. I'm in a current Twitter war with Dean from the North to see who can get the most followers. He has not engaged me in this war. I realised he had 28 followers, I had 29. I declared a war, and he ignored me. But I do message him every time someone follows me. So,
well, hopefully we can get
help me with this war.
We can get you a couple of followers. We'll see. All right, perfect. Thank you so much. That's Chris Hench, Henshaw. Thank you.